Right, so you've seen the play. It's a very amateur production, and it is a little bit demanding. One or two people have just said they've seen it for the second or third time, and it means a lot more to them now than it did the first time. The original idea of the play was to have a consciousness-raising mechanism, because there are quite a lot of DVDs and videos being passed around on money and debt and all of those issues. One of them is referred to at the very end of that play, that there is a little reference to money as debt, and that video I'm leaving here as well, so there will be opportunity for people to follow that up. The play itself, of course, is available to be used, and it could be slightly adapted with Linda's permission. So you need to get in contact with Linda, and we can let you have the script, and then you can go ahead and put on a production of your own, which has its advantage that it draws in other people to get involved with it, and then it raises these issues, and that is the whole idea of the play. Now, why did Linda write the play? In 1978, Linda was a lone parent. Her husband had just died. She had a nearly 2-year-old little girl, and a little boy was born to her, and he had cerebral palsy. She had no particular income, but she was a very, very determined lady. And she wasn't happy with the treatment that was offered to her by the medical profession. They just said, oh, well, this is just a hopeless case, and we'll just make him comfortable. And indeed, would have been quite happy to see him die. There were several panic stations in that first year or two. Gradually, she found ways of helping him, and with the support of the local community in Forest Row where she was living, she managed to get enough money to take him, the whole family, to America, where they developed some exercises, physical exercises, were able to help children of that type. As time went on, she became aware that it was very largely a question of the amount of oxygen getting to the brain, and she came across the hyperbaric technique, the hyperbaric chamber technique. I know very little of this scientific and technical side of Linda's work, but she managed to write a bestseller. She got onto the national news many times, into the papers and onto the television and onto the radio programs, and with the money that she got from the first book, she was able to start setting up a clinic, and about 10 years ago she has now been able to set up the Advanced Institute for the Hutchinson technique. And this technique has 3 aspects to it. The main aspect is helping the parents to help their child. That's the whole idea. Using breathing techniques, diet is one of the main things, and of course exercises. And so we might be able to just have a little look at that. There we see, this is the brochure. There is a website, the Advanced Centre for the Hutchinson Technique, and you can see people and Linda up on the left-hand side there. She personally assists all of the families and talks with them about the best methods of treatment and care, and they come back from all over the world to get support. So that was the background. as time went on, Linda registered for a PhD. Some work was done on her technique and to examine whether it was just a placebo effect or whether, in fact, there was something worth pursuing scientifically in the help which she was able to give to these various people and their children and some brain-damaged adults as well. And the answer was yes, there is definitely a sign that it is more than the placebo effect. But there's no money to be had for that research because, after all, the pharmaceutical companies are not getting anything out of it. And they are, of course, behind most of the research in the universities these days. So, Linda came across a group of monetary reformers, and they introduced her to the work of Michael Rowbottom, and she also came across my work and the social credit ideas, and so she got her head round that and produced this play. The play is meant to be more of a consciousness-raising exercise. It's a way of beginning to think about these things rather than being a definitive answer. And so it would be good if you would sort of give your comments about what you thought, what you'd like to know a little bit more about the play. How did it strike you?
I had a question. I don't know if it was raised in the actual thing itself, but where in the video itself, but where does the banks where did they initially get the power to create the money from nothing? Like, and where the government just wouldn't let them do that just straight off the bat? You know?
Yes. And this is a very, very good question, very good starting question, because if you look at the Bank of England Act, you see, that was looking at the possibility of changing the law. And it is, of course, the law which enables the banks to do what they actually do. And that law should be decided democratically, but this is the big question mark. Who decides and how is it decided? Now, if you remember, we had a little history lesson in the middle of the play about the Bank of England Act, of how it was set up. And in I think it was 1694 or so, there was the official setting up of the Bank of England. What had happened was that the kings in those days used to wage war in order to stay in power or to try to nobble a bit of somebody else's kingdom, like France, or Scotland or whatever. And in order to wage a war, you need an army. And in order to organise an army, you need some gold in those days, money. And of course, who has the gold? Who's holding the gold? But the goldsmiths. So the goldsmiths in the cities would have the source of money. So the king came along and borrowed from the goldsmiths in order to pay, and says, I'll pay you back when I've won the war. Well, the goldsmiths got a bit fed up because the kings were in the habit of not paying them back when they won the war. And so William and Mary, he was needing a lot of money, I forget how much was mentioned there. And so the group of individuals, private individuals who were quite wealthy, decided on this ruse, really, that they would lend the money to the king, who of course is the head of state and has the right to raise taxes from the people, and then they would write it into the constitution that he has to pay them back, and they of course get the interest on the national debt. So this is a little history lesson which most people don't know. I mean, we are not taught it in the schools, but it is there if you look into the history books. Now, there were several times during the play when it was mentioned that we're not just talking about England. We are talking about the international situation. Each country has got some kind of a government, and each government is into a relationship with the banking system. And this is what we're trying to talk about now. So is there any other question following from there? Yes, yes,
I like seeing in the play how they gave solutions in the sense of talking about it, get the word out, get around, which is wonderful. Having working in government myself, I see how really the media decides what goes on with legislation as far as making it a populist issue. So I don't hold much hope for traditional channels being changed very quickly. So from a grassroots perspective, what do we do? What can we do apart from talk? Any idea?
What can we do apart from talk? I mean, you're dismissing the most important thing that we can do, and that is to raise these issues with people, with other people, as well as thinking them through ourselves. And often when you begin to talk with somebody else, 2 or 3 people, 4 or 5 people together, it's amazing how your thinking then develops. And this ongoing sort of contemplating and thinking about issues is the only way forward. And it's the way that the bankers, shall we say, I mean, bankers and economists, I would say, don't want us to do. And so they teach us a particular party line, and of course you're accused of talking nonsense if you don't accept that line. But I think most of us who have studied economics certainly can see the flaws in it. So it is a case of getting yourself better informed. I talked the other day, or was it whenever, about my own story, you see. I mean, when I was at school and the 6th form, I was studying economics and just didn't make sense at all. So you begin to sort of ask questions, but there was nobody there at the time who could answer any of the questions that I knew of, you see. So it is a case of then turning to the books and studying them and thinking about them. But the beauty of the thing now is that we have this internet, and we can find out, we can key in, and we can actually get into contact with people, like you know, the monetary reform ideas and these different ideas. You have then to begin to start asking your own questions and not be content with the answers, because you may get some wrong answers. Some of the ideas, like this Bank of England Act, I have my very grave doubts as to whether this is a very sensible way.
That's the new act, is it, Francis?
Well, it is only an act which is being bandied about. I mean, it isn't likely to take off on the statute book at all. And if it did, I'm not even sure that that would be the correct way forward. But it is a terrific consciousness-raising idea. If we did change the law, if we could change the law, who can change the law? We are the people who actually do determine the law. And that's an interesting thing about this particular play. The bankers, the economists, the powers that be, don't want us to think about it. Because as long as we accept and do nothing, then they remain in power. So that's dangerous to begin to think and think about alternatives. So that's the most dangerous thing you can do, is talk. Is there another question anywhere?
Francis, you made reference to the Bank of England, the play did, and also the new Bank of England Act. Now in Australia we set up the Commonwealth Bank under the Commonwealth Bank Act, and that was in the early days, and that was essentially set up to challenge the central banks and of course their fraudulent behaviour, and it was able to issue debt-free money to government, and that went on for quite a few years, and we had quite a few projects around Australia that were developed as a consequence of that. In fact, I believe we ended the war debt-free, the only country to end a war debt-free.
Yeah.
And but since then there was a deliberate campaign to emasculate the Commonwealth Bank, and it is in its current emasculated state, almost or virtually of no consequence, similar to every other bank. I might just draw attention to everyone to the fact that the story of the Commonwealth Bank is on the webpage bankwatch.info, and you can read about it, and I'd encourage you to go there and have a look, because Australia has just as colourful a history and just as determined a campaign against the community from seizing or maintaining or regaining control of their banking system. Yeah.
Yes, thanks, Annie. Yes, that's absolutely true, that all the ventures that have taken place in the last 100 years, shall we say, have been targeted by the other side whenever they are effective. But we have now got the internet. We can find out what did happen in these cases, and we can begin to work together towards new ventures. We don't have to be really sort of brilliant thinkers, but it's just beginning to question and not accept what's going on. And I think we'll find that people are beginning to look for answers, and there are other people out there that are really just ready and listening. Yes?
I was thinking that a few comments. In the early 20s and 30s, of course, C.H. Douglas and social credit, there was lots and lots of home groups, weren't there? Small cell groups talking about it. Could you expand on that a little?
Yes, this is another of the difficulties that we face now. There was the custom right across, including right across the UK, but right across Australia as well, very, very strong home study idea. You didn't just go to university in order to get a job in a big corporation that was going to pay you a salary. You actually studied because you were interested in a topic. And in order to study, you might go to an extramural or university extension course for a period of weeks, a term, a year, something like that. People invited speakers to come, lecturers to come from the university and teach their group. And they would also go off on summer schools, weekends and weeks away together, the whole group, all the families and everything. And they would have a speaker, and that speaker would speak to them in the morning, and then they would go walking on the hills and talking about what they'd heard from the speaker. There was a very strong movement for home study and in groups, which we don't have any longer. Whether it's possible to recreate that kind of a situation, I don't know. But it is something worth thinking about.
Francis, can I just ask, is there a difference between a bank and a credit union? Like, is there a better one for us to support as far as opening an account with them, or for our children, or that kind of thing?
Yeah. The credit union is not an actual bank, and so you're asking me a technical term, and we'll be on forever if we start to explain the difference between the credit unions. They're a very good idea for working together in groups and getting to know about the banking system and understanding the banking system, because it does raise these questions of the difference between a bank and a credit union immediately when you're working within them. But sometimes people can fail to realise that we cannot live on credit unions alone under the present legal system. The credit union or some of these other sort of let schemes and so on, they can operate on the fringes, but you do need to have somebody who is keyed into the banking system at the moment. We can't escape from that banking system completely. So again, they're very good ideas. But
the credit union is actually a customer of the bank, isn't it?
yes, it is. Yes,
How
you
does
are.
the let system work? You just mentioned.
Well, they're more like what I would call a glorified babysitting circle. I don't know whether you come across babysitting circles now. It's a case of issuing a sort of currency. I think you do have similar schemes, you know. So you give it a name like Keys in Keithley, for instance, and you issue those as a form of money, and so you work for each other and exchange goods and services. And some of them are quite sophisticated, and they're sort of keyed into, shall we say, the local authority, or will allow you to spend that money within their services, or vice versa, and keying into local businesses where you might have 50% the bank money and 50% of the let's money, and so on. Again, it's all on the internet. You've just got to look it up and see where these schemes are happening, and see whether there is something that would suit what you're wanting to do. Very interesting. Yes?
Good question. Other than borrowing money from banks, of course, is there anything that we could be doing at the moment, quite possibly that we're unaware of, that actually supports quite a bit their system and contributes to that system?
That we may be doing?
Yes, and if so, what are ways that we can avoid it?
Well, I suppose at the moment you could say breathing is supporting their system, isn't it? Because, you know, every day, from birth to death, you know, this issue of where is some money going to, where is there enough money going to come, is fundamentally part of our lives. We can try and find ways around, and tomorrow I'm intending to talk a little bit more about strategies that we can adopt in order to try to accommodate ourselves more comfortably to the situation. But basically, we are supporting the system by the very fact that we exist, and, you know, we buy clothes, we buy food, we buy all the things that we need from the system, and we work for the system. You know, even if you do well, that's another story. Yes. Do we want to introduce Harris now? I think, has everybody had a chance to ask a question?
I've got one.
Can you perhaps talk a little about money, about value of money, about the paper, about why we put so much value onto that bit of paper, which is, you know, in itself costs a couple of cents to print.
Yes.
What happened historically for us to develop this mentality?
Yes, now that's a very interesting question, because you know, this is where we come in to this whole issue. You know, what is this money? So tomorrow we're going to start, I think, with something which leads into this very question. I think we'll talk about that whole question in much more detail. It is the key question. How have we got into this pickle? So we'll do that tomorrow. Did you want another question?
That's one thing. So if we do change the money system, go to this proposed new act, what will that look like in terms of just like globally? So how are the other countries going to react if we go our own separate way? and go with their own banking system, how will they react? What will happen?
War? Will it be war?
War, could be war, yes.
Oh, well, yes. Don't panic. We're not going to get there in a hurry, because there are the powers which are watching any potential change, and they'll make sure that nothing happens until we can get into the steering seat, into the driving seat. And that means that a lot of work has to be done, and we're in the very early stages, and we're not going to change things overnight, but things are going to have to change into the future. And this is why we're so keen that younger people will realise, because we can only leave a little bit of a legacy, and it will be up to you to think about it. And you can either do as the bank has suggested and just continue, on the same old lines, just take it for granted and just do nothing, or you can begin to stop and think about what is actually going on. And that's quite a good point to introduce, Nara, because I think most of you are well aware of the issues of food, and how food and health are so very closely linked, and how we are given the impression that if you're ill, you need to go to the doctor, who will give you some pills, some pharmaceutical products, or some invasive surgery, and they will take over your body and put it right in some kind of a quick fix. And this is the conclusion that Linda came to, was that in fact we should do something different.